Well, everybody, we're back with a PowerPoint sensation. Look at this, 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 look at this. Hey, go back. For the Many Saints of Newark this time, the great Sopranos movie. Was it great? Probably not, if you just scrolled through these things and saw that most of the titles were bad. The headlines, the whatever you call these things, the things at the top. As you all know, my third most popular video on the main channel is a big Sopranos analysis. Meadow Sopranos, my queen, I love her. Sadly, not in this movie. Her mother was, can you believe it? We'll talk about that later. Her father was too, crazy. The Many Saints of Newark was announced. It had been in production for a long time, I'm pretty sure. Then a trailer came out. I think on this very secondary ENT channel, you could find a reaction to that trailer when it first came out. Or maybe I just did it on stream. That would be crazy. I never ended up seeing it because I didn't go to the theater very often back then. Didn't have any money, really, to get the fucking Uber there and back, if you know what I'm speaking of. So I never saw it, and then it came out and it got vaguely negative reviews, and the things everybody was saying about it didn't seem too interesting. I always intended to watch it, I just never did. I nearly started on a plane one time to New Zealand, or was it back? I can't even remember. And I think I started, and I saw the bit of the opening scene, but, I couldn't hear it because the headphones were bad. So I was like, fuck it. I should probably watch this in a better situation. And that better situation was yesterday. Can you believe it? So I put it off. It's been on the list, but finally we've watched it. So I've seen The Sopranos all the way through only once, actually. I've seen a million videos about it. I've thought about it a million times. I've rewatched funny Paulie scenes, the funny scene compilations a million times on YouTube. But there is one reference there's a moment in the movie that I thought was ridiculous, and apparently it was referenced in the original show, but I didn't remember it at all. So maybe my knowledge on the show isn't the best. I have rewatched season 1 like 4 times, intending to rewatch the whole thing. I've seen season 2 probably 3 times. I remember on my closest rewatch, I think I got to the rape episode and was like, I don't want to watch this now. And then I never ended up picking it back up. So I guess I've seen seasons 2, 3, and episode 1 of season 3 a lot of times. But everything else I've never seen more than once outside of, I've watched a bunch of reaction video series to it. I've rewatched a bunch of individual scenes and compilations and stuff. I'm a bit of a Sopranos expert here. Though I guess maybe not, because I missed that one reference that I had to pick up later by watching a video afterwards. So anyway, big Sopranos fan. Didn't watch Many Saints of Newark, though. Whatever. The Sopranos is one of the best shows of all time. I'm a much more of a Mad Men guy. Mad Men is like my favorite show of all time. I might even have the controversial opinion that Boardwalk Empire is better than The Sopranos, but that's a crazy one, and we don't have to talk about that right now. Black Sail's probably also better than The Sopranos, so, it's in, 4th. It's above Game of Thrones, and You, and Cowboy Bebop Netflix, which was the last show we did a PowerPoint on, but anyway. Let's dive into it, huh? The movie has a very bad reputation. A 2.8 on Letterboxd, so I had lower expectations going in, so that might lead to my more positive, somewhat view of things. That being said, this whole PowerPoint is me complaining about things, so I gave it a 3.5 on Letterboxd, though I did certainly come away disappointed. It is true. It does feel like it's made by somebody who has lost their touch. And if David Chase wasn't attached, I think this movie would be even more shit on, and it would be literally like somebody raped the corpse of The Sopranos and tried to be The Sopranos but failed. Because I guess a kneecapping thing, now I think I use that vernacular somewhere in here too. I say kneecapping, can you believe it? I'm just so Sopranos pilled here. I kneecap people, I'm from the mob. A lot of the times it feels like they're trying to do a Sopranos thing, but they don't have the Sopranos magic and it falls flat. It feels like an imitation almost. Especially some of the character portrayals absolutely feel like imitations. But we'll get to those later. But yeah, I don't know. We'll get into the things I liked and why it sounds like I should have given it a 1 by the description now, but we'll get to it. Oh, we're going to get to it now, because this is overall. I think all the original stuff is very good in parts and separate from the legacy of The Sopranos. And if it was separate from the legacy of The Sopranos, it would be all right. But every reference or attempted tie-in to the original show was almost unbearably terrible. None of the characters feel right. The vibe and comedy doesn't feel right, except for Joey Diaz, funnily enough. And ultimately, a lot of this stuff feels underdeveloped. That's like a criticism everybody seems to have from the movie of like there's too much crammed in here and it's sort of unfocused in parts, which is kind of true. It's not really the big deal. If all these other things were right, this movie would still be like a 5 out of 5. That is. The I kind of talk about this here. DICKY MULTISANTI is really good. I think I start this. I think I can't remember the character's name. His dad's wife, the young wife that he ends up sleeping with, and Michaela D. Rosie's character. I think she is like the standout character of the movie. I think Ray Liotta is good in both roles. Like all of the non-Sopranos characters. Well, DICKY MULTISANTI is referenced in The Sopranos. He's not in The Sopranos because he dies at the end of this movie. Spoiler alert. There are spoilers in this review. If you didn't know, you know. It's basically everything that's allowed to be its own feels developed. Everything that isn't feels like a shitty imitation, and I hate it. We'll get into much greater detail later. I didn't even like the references and stuff like that. It was really bad. Especially the lines. We'll get into that. The vibe being off is the biggest thing because it's almost there in parts, but it's not. And the writing isn't the same. I don't know. A lot of it comes with just like cinematic language where it feels there is a fancy look to the movie, which is very much not there in The Sopranos. Not that The Sopranos isn't very well shot. Obviously, the directing is very, very strong in The Sopranos. And the visual stuff. But The Sopranos feels very... It doesn't feel gritty. It feels... I don't know. The Sopranos overall is a very pathetic show. Like, that is like the driving, descriptively real... That is like the cornerstone of what makes it like one of the most interesting pieces of writing ever. Is that everything and everyone feels horribly pathetic in a way that you can't help but recognize reality in it. And the movie feels too grand in places. And then when it goes for like a sad or a pathetic moment, it's like way too dramatic and over the top and is not good. Like when DICKY MULTISANTI kills people, it's like, this is like terrible and over. Like if you compare that to like Ralph and Tony having the fight and Ralphie dying, like that feels disgusting and gross and pathetic. Whereas this is like grandiose and like hyper dramatic, and the Sopranos is so great because that scene and Ralphie getting killed off is because Tony can't get over that he might have killed the horse to get like insurance money, and like. What a stupid reason to kill somebody after you've had so much development, like starting to like Ralphie and stuff like that. And for it to be so grimy and like they're using like spray on each other that they find in the kitchen and there's like a knife but nobody gets stabbed and his brains get bashed in. But it's not like dramatic and I don't know. It's just like very like ill. Like ill. I don't like that I saw any of this. Whereas it's like, oh, he's dramatically ramming his dad's head into the thing and then he loses it in an anger moment and he's fucking dead. It's like, oh. And now he's got to hide the body like, yuck. The vibe and the comedy is also like everything in The Sopranos is funny, and a lot of the time the funniness is unsaid, where it's just like a character being pathetic or being an obvious hypocrite or literally contradicting themselves in the thing, but none of the other characters realize it and they don't realize it, and they just look really dumb. There is none of that in this movie, and all the comedy is either like references to the original show, somebody saying something funny, etc., etc. It feels it's just completely off. It's like. It feels like it misses the point of The Sopranos almost. Joey Diaz is the only one that sort of has the funniness down, which is very funny, because it's like it's Joey Diaz. What's he doing here? But even then, the way his character is handled and like DICKY beating up later feels so un-Sopranos and stupid, and it's like ugh. In that sense, then Joey Diaz's head gets blown off. A lot of the violence also felt like too dramatic and like not Sopranos-y. Like there's no shot in the original show of somebody's head getting shot off. Like there's like that's more like. Now this is actually a talking point I get into later, is sort of the Madmanification of the writing in a sense, and how I think some of its influences perk through because obviously David Chase likes Mad Men and he likes Boardwalk Empire. The violence is more Boardwalk Empire-y. And that works for that show because that show is very gritty and is like much more grand than The Sopranos in a sense of like wearing the nice suits but juxtaposing it with the visceral violence. Whereas The Sopranos is like the violence isn't cool and neither is the people involved. It's not as classy in a sense. But anyway, I kind of made my point there. And ultimately, a lot of, we talked about the underdevelopment stuff. The good and the new, we can talk about in a second. Anybody saying anything? Is there gabagool? Yes, they do say gabagool and afangool and all these silly Italian phrases and stuff like that. Me and young Tony have the same haircut. CeeLo Pilled, get the fuck out of here. I already spoiled some stuff. Do they play the song? Miller the Killer, you won't fucking believe it. The song is the credit song, and they build up to it in the last scene. It's so fucking bad. It's going to be pointed out in the My Problems with the Old Characters or the References section. Oh my god, did I absolutely hate the song at the end. Because it's like, Tony Soprano hasn't looked like he's going to join the mob the whole movie, and then Dickie gets killed at the end, and they do their pinky promise even though he's a corpse and stuff. And like, as Tony Soprano is looking down menacingly at his dead favorite fake uncle, who just got killed in a mob thing, the intro beats of the music start playing. And it builds slowly as Tony's look gets more menacing, and it zooms in on him, and then cut to credits, the song starts playing full blast, and you're like, how about I fucking kill myself? Ugh. And I think a lot of the enjoyment coming out of this movie can, like, I've seen a lot of videos that are like, oh, all the references were really good, and all the characters that were playing the old characters, like, they did a great job. And most of the people that like that stuff are like, but why were the blacks in the movie? We hated the black stuff. Because, like, half the movie is about, like, black exploitation in, like, the 60s. Which is, like, obviously the best stuff in the movie, but we'll get to it in a second. So it's very funny. But, yeah, like, I hated it. I hated every bit of it. Tony had to earn the show playing the song playing by going through the events of the movie. But Tony's not in this movie at all, and the only thing that happens to him is that his uncle dies at the end when he was supposed to go on a date with him. Like, nothing bad happens to Tony in this movie. He doesn't do anything in the movie. And the most of the movie is him being like, I'm not gonna be a mobster, Dad, you're a pussy. And then he's like, Mom, why don't you love me? And it's like, well, I saw 3 seasons of Mom, why don't you love me? Anyway, it's funny. No shot, that's awesome. Yes, Miller, it was awesome. It was not quite like, that's been done very well in other places. Like, what, Die Buster does that at some point, and I would have loved it. I don't know, it's like, ugh. Cringe. Anyway, I'm sure a lot of people like that, and they're very mad right now. The good and the new. I really liked Michela Di Rossi. She's Italian, goddammit, and she's the prettiest girl you've ever seen in your life. She was the standout of the movie. I feel like nobody talks about this, like, in all the videos I watched after this. Like, nobody even mentions this character when she's, like, the third main character of the movie. She's initially married to Dicky Moltisanti's dad, who has just come back from Italy, who is an older guy, and who's, like, wowed her with promises of America and being rich, and he's got the slick coat and stuff, and he's coming back. She doesn't speak much English. It's clear that, well, it seems like she's been, like, taken advantage of, and she's been, like, sold this fool's dream. But later they kind of recontextualize that of, like, oh no, she knew what she was doing, and she was, like, trying to make it big, and she has, like, admirations of being a boss and stuff like that. That's also a great scene later where she's talking to the hairdresser lady, and she's like, and I'm not going to be a nun. I don't want to be a lesbian. I wanted to be a priest, but women can't be priests, obviously, especially in Italy and Rome. And she's like, because I want to be the boss. And, like, she wants to boss her around her own hair salon or whatever. That's, like, a great scene. Anyway, she's great. She's like, and then she ends up sleeping with Dickie and stuff. Like, they're given eyes to each other when they first meet. Because Dickie kills the father, because the father starts beating her up. She kicks her down the stairs at one point, and Dickie's like, I didn't like that when you did it to my mom, and whatever. That was kind of cute. But then I didn't like the death scene or whatever. I didn't really like the Ray Liotta performance for the dad. I think I talked about this a little bit. We may as well talk about it now. Even the good characters, which are all of these, like, fundamentally don't belong in the Sopranos world. Like, now I'm going to talk about this when I talk about Johnny. I think Johnny is, like, the worst character in this movie in, like, breaking the Sopranos, which is Tony's dad, where he is, like, way too masculine and, like, cool. And he's played by the guy, like, the big Italian guy from Wolf of Wall Street, who's in a lot of things where he usually plays this, like, commanding role. And that's not like there is no Sopranos character that is like that. That doesn't like nobody's allowed to be that cool in the Sopranos. That's like one of the fundamental rules is that everybody is like very like weak, obviously. I guess Dr. Melfi is the only person that's allowed to be continually cool and right. Um, we'll talk more about that when I get to that part. But Ray Liotta is because the thing here is Ray Liotta plays two identical brothers and they're like opposites. Where he plays Dicky's dad, who is like very loud and like trying to be cool and stuff, and he's like an older school gangster of like everything he says goes, and he's like an old school like 40s dad or something where he's like at the table demanding Dicky, even though Dicky's like 35, like fill his cup for him and stuff like that. And he's being like patriarchal in that sense, not even just in sort of like a misogynist way, though he is obviously too when he like they get into a fight because the girl's douchebag or whatever is up in the sink or something, and he's like, I told you not to do that around me, it's not ladylike or something, so he kicks her down the stairs. Also the beating the woman part, very 40s. The But yeah, that first character wasn't very Sopranos, and even the second character, which is that character has a twin brother that's been in prison his whole life because for murder. He killed the maid guy or whatever. And he is like incredibly soft spoken. The acting in those scenes is really good. Ray Liotta's acting there, and I think it's like his last role before he died or whatever. Is really good. And like the soft spokenness, and he's almost the Dr. Melfi insert type where he's talking with Dicky through therapy and stuff, but he's also very demanding in very specific ways that are very odd, which is a very like Sopranos Mad Men type thing. But even he is like too wise to be a Sopranos character almost. It's interesting. I think we were talking about the wife somehow. Well, it ends up being the thing. There's two main dudes, and she's sleeping with both of them, Dicky and then Harold later, who's the main black guy. But every scene she was in, I thought she was like awesome. I thought she was very interesting. What she wanted, what she didn't wanted, what she was like willing to do in sort of a traditional woman sense, and what she wasn't. And like when she sleeps with Harold or whatever, she's like saying how she thought sex with a black guy would be different or whatever, but it turns out it's just the same or something. And even how Harold reacts to all of her like bed talk there is like very interesting. All of the non-Sopranos characters feel good. I don't know if any of them necessarily feel very Sopranos. Harold kind of did, though he gets like too happy of an ending for it to feel like a Sopranos thing. Dicky himself is very good, as I have written here. You know, I'm a genius. He's very charismatic. He's very like... He feels a lot like Tony Soprano when he's at his best, like in terms of morally, where he's like the fun uncle almost. Now obviously this is undercut by him being like very violent sometimes when he like does a thing, and obviously in the end he ends up killing the girlfriend character too. He drowns her and stuff because she reveals that she was sleeping with Harold or whatever. And that feels Sopranos like, oh, he's like actually like the perfect kind of masculine guy. Like he has like this very good masculine outlook, but also he's like crazy kind of and violent and stuff. And like that's kind of what's done with Tony Soprano in the original show, except it's like way more nuanced and much more interesting, and it's sort of fast tracked and truncated into this movie to the point where it's like, whatever. Even like they try to parallel him to Tony too, because like a big thing in the Sopranos is, right, Tony has these like, I made a whole video about this. He has the delusions of grandeur for like the older generation about how they were all perfect and how they're nothing like him, and he's got all these problems and insecurities. And like repeatedly the message throughout the show is like, well, Tony, did you know from Hesh, your father's old friend, that your father also used to have panic attacks and was a pussy? And Tony's like, oh my god, the old people that I looked up to also had problems? And obviously this is being done with Dicky here, who is Tony's like sort of idol. It's like, oh, the scene where he's very sad after he's killed his girlfriend / his father's wife. And he's like at the desk and he's like drinking and like sobbing and stuff like that. Which kind of felt a little too Mad Men-y too. We have a whole dot point about Mad Men later, so we'll wait for that. But yeah, so when the original characters were by themselves talking to each other, which is a decent part of the movie, it did let the movie like create its own thing for a second that was good. And And, like, if you think about it, like, it doesn't really feel like The Sopranos. It's not really written in The Sopranos style or anything like that. But you're like, oh, this is a pretty good other thing. It's more so you're reminded about how this isn't The Sopranos when The Sopranos characters are on screen. But yeah. Grandfather Multisanti was the first major indication that things were off. This is definitely true when he's first introduced, and you're like, this is not a Sopranos character. Too loud and too actually commanding for the Sopranos compared to the other old guys in the series like Feach, Carmine, or Junior, etc. It's true how like older like guys from that generation are sort of portrayed in the actual Sopranos. Now, these guys are all probably a generation after this guy, so I guess you could get around it by saying that. But like, Feach is sort of a commanding old guy. Like, there's a patheticness that's definitely portrayed and a stupidness in his like aspirations for how it used to be and even his ruthlessness. With Carmine, there's like a funny, dismissive cynicism to his age. And with Junior, obviously, you could write a fucking book about Junior and why his portrayal of sort of being an old, cranky, the old times were better guy is interesting. And none of this is portrayed in Grandfather Multisanti here. Michael Gandolfini comes the closest to being like an original character, true. But only Livia/Principal Nice Tony, the characterization of Tony is real in the original show. Michael Gandolfini captures sort of the innocent side of Tony and that sort of admirable style of Tony well. Probably helps because he has similar mannerisms because he's literally James Gandolfini's kid. Though, in a surprise, the younger version of Tony is in the movie for a lot longer, like the first 40 or 50 minutes of the movie. Michael Gandolfini is not in because it's an even younger version of Tony, which is interesting. And that kid actor was pretty good too. Because I'm kind of criticizing Michael Gandolfini's performance here of like, the menacing Tony is not really in there and he probably should be more. Like, even when he fights that one kid in front of Carmela, that is another one of the terrible like cameos. Why is Carmela just there for one scene? She doesn't really look right. She doesn't really act right. I don't know. I think in my mind, Carmela has always been like a very do-good, like follow the rules type girl. So for her to be like hanging out with Tony in high school, like trying to get drinks from his weird uncle, that's also her actual uncle, is like weird, and I didn't like that characterization. But there's fleshing that out later. And also for her to be such a minor role is like silly. Just don't have her in the movie. God damn it. Though it is hard because Tony's characterization in the original show, now I'd have to do a proper rewatch to like cast judgment, but Tony is rather flippant, and I think some of his characterization is inconsistent in the original show. Now I don't mean to say like sometimes he does seem like a really good guy and sometimes he seems like a really bad guy, because obviously that's like the whole conceit of the show, and especially his character. Tony is sometimes too smart and sometimes too stupid in the original show. And I don't mean in decisions, I mean in understanding things. Like, there are moments where, especially earlier on, where Tony is like really smart. Like, he even like says he understands Freud because he did like 2 semesters of college or something. Which doesn't feel like something Tony should know come like season 6 Tony. He does have quiet moments of like interpersonal intelligence. But generally he does come across as kind of like a dumb guy. That's not true. But there's like no dumbness in young Tony here. In fact, his intelligence is pointed out a bunch of times. There's a lack of self-awareness, I think, to Tony in the show, which doesn't really come across here. So it's hard to critique like Michael Gandolfini's performance here when Tony's characterization is either so complex or sort of inaccurate in sometimes. But kind of all the Sopranos characters have that sometimes, which is kind of part of the thing, but this is kind of a conversation for a different day. Harold was also great, but maybe that was to the detriment of the film. Harold is kind of supposed to be the villain, kind of not, but also he gets the happy ending in the end and is like Dicky supposed to be the villain. Like this... And also their conflict kind of seems a little silly. So I think it might hurt the movie that he's like good. Because at one point you're just like, oh well, I kind of hope Harold wins. Like, fuck Dickie. And that kind of has the Dickie stuff, the resolution of that fall flat. But it kind of, and The Sopranos kind of did this towards the end, where it was like passing judgment on the characters at the end by having them fuck up, but this fuck up counts more than the other fuck ups. And you're like, oh, that does fit in the character, but also like this feels like a way to just have us be against him so we don't feel so bad when he dies. There's a big aspect of Boardwalk Empire's finale, but it's like, I love it there, so that's funny. But like Dickie killing the wife at the end is obviously like, well, he's kind of jumped the shark here, and well, if he gets killed, okay, I'm not going to feel as bad as I might have 3 seconds ago before this happened. But then obviously Harold isn't the one that kills him in the end. It's fucking Junior, which is stupid, but we'll get into that. You certainly felt for the black experience in this movie. There is, and it's kind of short, but there is like a bunch of like race stuff where it's like, man, I sure hope these black people kill all these white people. And they didn't even go that hard with it, but so that sort of makes you root for Harold. Now they kind of get around this by not having the climax of the film being a battle between the two of them, which is very Sopranos to have the anticlimax in that sense. But I don't know. There's also a thing where Harold gets a happy ending, right? He like moves into a white neighborhood and like flips off the white guys that are mad about it. And that's cool. That feels cathartic. I'm like, that's nice. But also, it does feel un-Sopranos. It's like, no, a character doesn't get a happy ending in The Sopranos like this. Or this moment of, like, vengeful glee. But it's also like, you can't really have the black character not get this in the end. Like, that's crazy. So it's like, two opposing forces here where it's like, I don't know. Even this resolution that I'm kind of like and I feel some catharsis for, I'm like, it doesn't really fit. The other good thing is just seeing the family characters just hanging out was always fun too. It wasn't really fun. It was always interesting when like Livia is on screen again and you're like, oh my god, this is like 10, 20 years after the fact. Like, what is going to be portrayed in Livia's character here when she's interacting with these other characters? It's like, oh, this is like very interesting to see how this will play out at all. It's very interesting in the moment. Now, having seen it, reflecting on it, I kind of don't like any of it. But in terms of a viewing experience, it was very engaging in that sense. So yeah. Attempts at Sopranos commentary. I know we're going to run out of time, chat, because this fucking shit is going... God damn it. Rizzler or Big Justice as young Tony would go so hard. That is true. They are Italian, I think. I might have already touched on some of this stuff. It was very intriguing, especially once the recognizable characters started showing up and everybody was interacting, I think, and the attempted commentary that was being made on the original show so many years later. I kind of just talked about all this. The biggest example was the Livia principal scene that almost tried to be a payoff for Livia's character, which was then backtracked, which was very Sopranos, but not done in an especially Sopranos way. There's a scene with Olivia and Tony's principal after he's like getting suspended, where the principal clearly like likes Tony a lot and sees potential in him, and tries to also principal played by John Slattery's IRL wife, who's also his wife in Mad Men, who is a absolutely terrific actress. I think she might steal the movie in this one scene. Her like softness and her principal, like her good teacher-ness that's portrayed in this one scene that she's in is like exceptional. It's also feels very Mad Men-y and not very Sopranos-y, which everything good detracts from this movie trying to fit it into the original show. I do want to comment on that a little bit because, especially with Cowboy Bebop live action, I continually was like, we shouldn't compare it to the original show. And that's because that's an adaptation. This is trying to be the same stuff and tie into things very directly. Like, there are characters from the show in this. And, like, even Christopher is doing the voiceover bit as a framing device for the whole movie. So I feel like getting the vibe right is especially important and something I care a lot about going into this movie, whereas I was much more lenient on Cowboy Bebop live action doing its own thing entirely and not really comparing it to the original show because there's new characters and new actors, etc., etc. These are not new actors. These aren't even alternative world characters. These are literally the same characters, supposedly. And so getting the vibe wrong feels like wrong, even though the scene was great. Because the scene is like Tony just the principal was asking guiding questions and trying to see, like, what makes your mother happy, asked Tony, and obviously we all go, nothing makes Livia happy, she's an evil bitch. And then the principal retells this story Tony would have just told to her about how one night when his dad was in prison, they cuddled together and she read him a book. And there's like a very personal anecdote about how he didn't know what ingots was and you explained it to him. And Livia didn't remember it initially, and then she pretended to remember it, and then she actually did remember it, and then she started crying. And I was like, if they leave this scene alone, it kind of breaks the show, but it kind of, in a meta sense, is like a kind of beautiful addition to the show. Of like, Livia did like love Tony and was capable of love at certain places. And it would have been terrible for like a continuity sense because like Livia is very much not capable of that, I don't think, in the original show. But they do hint at Sopranos is built on contradictions. Obviously, in her mind, she does love her children in some sense, but you understand what I mean. Though there is that very, 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 very interesting bit of characterization way later on where Janice and the younger sister, whose name I'm forgetting, are going through like Livia's stuff after she's died, and like they say like the only person she kept any stuff from was you, Tony. Like she has your old like homework books or something, or she doesn't have any of our stuff. And it's like, but Livia tried to kill Tony, and it's like, oh, it's like a contradiction thing. It's like, did she ever actually love him? Well, like what was she, etc., etc. So I thought this was like a more optimistic view of like almost a retcon in a sense, and that can always work in a meta sense because this comes so much later, and this is sort of the lasting sort of sentiment you will have. And it's almost like David Chase right before he died had to show some light in Livia, and it could be like, oh, this is like crazy and touching and stuff. She always did love him or something like that. But then they do the Sopranos thing of having a touching moments where characters seem to understand each other and understand their like mutual problems, only then to like not learn their lesson and fall directly back into bad habits when right after this, Livia and Tony are having like a cute moment together, but then they get into an argument over some really stupid shit, where she accuses him of smoking pot or whatever. But it's actually her being mad at Janice, and it's like, oh, Livia is like this evil person, incapable of any progress, just like all the other Sopranos characters, really, and the whole show. Like Christopher and his addictions, or Tony and trying to be satisfied with the world, or whatever. But the way they did it was like not Sopranos at all. Like there's a way where in the original show this would have all been undermined, and there's like a comedic aspect to how it would have been undermined, and here it's just like a long scene. And like the actors aren't right, and they're not delivering the lines in Sopranos ways, which was another big thing and why the vibe was wrong, is that they didn't really speak like Sopranos characters, and when they were trying to, it was like to a comedic degree, and it was like when they were literally doing like reference lines. There was certain parts where Dicky kind of got the thing back, and it was very telling because Christopher and his monologues, only at certain points though, got the way he should be speaking absolutely correct. The guy I'm going to hell for, I think he says it twice. So he says it at the end, which is bad and annoying, but at the beginning he said it, and it was a very like Christopher Sopranos way of saying something. And Dicky had some lines where it was like that. But other than that, they didn't really do it. And there was just something wrong about that scene. Because that scene was really good, even with Livia and the principal. And even the principal stole the show, you know. But then we got the madmanification of The Sopranos. It felt like the movie was going for moments throughout, like said Livia scene and others, which felt it felt like a very Madman way of writing something rather than a Sopranos way of writing things. Needed to be funnier or sadder rather than like profound and melancholic. So The Sopranos is funny and sad, whereas Mad Men is profound and melancholic. And a lot of the moments they seemed to be going for felt like Mad Men scenes. They felt like final episode draw out title credits song Mad Men things, instead of sort of Sopranos aspects. Now, obviously, there's like a famous story about how Matthew Weiner got them to change an end of an episode because he argued that like mob guys wouldn't do a thing. And it's where Tony beats up the politician dude for seeing his ex-girlfriend. And most of the writing staff wanted Tony to not care about this, which is what it seems to be in the beginning of the episode. But then at the end of the episode, he literally like breaks into their house and like starts beating the guy and emasculating him with like a belt while he's in like a robe or something in front of the girlfriend. When I first watched that episode, I did feel like it was kind of weirdly out of character for Tony. And that was a Matthew Weiner thing, like the Mad Men guy, my favorite guy. Potential sex pest, but we don't talk about that. And then you start to realize that there are kind of two Tonys in the original show, and that might go into the inconsistent characterization thing. Whereas there's those, because Matthew Weiner only came onto The Sopranos in like season 5 or something. But there is sort of like the earlier season Tony is a little smarter, and the later season Tony is a little more thuggish in a sense. And that might have been Matthew Weiner's influence, and it's very interesting. Because obviously David Chase like adores Matthew Weiner. You can see it whenever they're on screen together that he's like clearly his favorite, and his little favorite little Jewish son. And so I think especially because David Chase has talked about how he liked Mad Men a lot, and it's like, oh, have we seeped in a little bit here? Has the master become the apprentice in a sense, and he's like trying to write Mad Men moments. Particularly Dicky at the end, like crying while Tony's like banging on the door, feels like a very Don Draper-esque moment. Dicky even throughout the show, like in the very nice suits, it looks very Mad Men in certain senses. And obviously it's set in like the 60s, like Mad Men too. It's interesting in that sense, a little bit. Now, obviously, a lot of Mad Men comes from The Sopranos, so it might be a Mad Men influenced, Sopranos influenced Mad Men influenced Sopranos, like Devilman, Berserk, back and forth. But there were other things, I didn't write down the examples where it's like, this feels off a little bit. And even like the violence feels a little Boardwalk Empire-y, so it's like, these things all sort of come from like the common brain trust and method of doing things that originates from The Sopranos. So it's like, how can we attribute accolades to either of them? Does it really matter? It's just like a meta thing I was definitely conscious of while watching the movie, and certain things that are off. Like that principal scene very much feels like a Mad Men scene, because Mad Men is much more lenient in the patheticness of its characters, where it does allow characters to have like climactic moments with each other and good payoff moments with each other, as in like good, as in the situation is good, not like good writing things. Whereas The Sopranos really doesn't do that, and it kind of does sometimes with Tony's like literal immediate family of his wife and his kids. But even then, they're all like still undermining each other and don't really understand each other, and it's like a whole thing. I don't know. It's a bunch of interesting stuff. This goes to a larger point that the whole vibe was off, too dramatic, not funny enough, serious situations not being funny enough, characters not being stupid enough, Dicky killing everyone. I've kind of already talked about all this, and we got to start speeding through this shit. My problems with the old characters. Oh boy. Are you fat? That's a Sopranos line. Tony Blundetto was like the best Sopranos character. Fucking Steve Buscemi stole that season. Why wasn't he in this show? In the movie, rather. Hold on, I'm yawning, chat. I'm yawning. I really didn't like the casting for the old cast, though partially it has to do with the writing and characterization. A lot of people praise the Livia actress. Livia is close but slightly off. Her clearly wanting to fuck Dicky is a terrible choice in my mind. Livia is like asexual, absolutely, in every sense of the word, and only got married because of her terrible society. She did not want to fuck Dicky. There is no way this would ever fit into her characterization. So her like being smitten with him is like annoying to me, and I don't like it. There's other stuff too, where like the mannerisms are almost there. She looks a lot the part. They made her nose, I think, like bend a little bit, and it makes her look like Nancy Marchand or whatever the Livia actress's name was. But she's not quite there. She's not terrible, but she's not like good either, I don't think. She is good in the like she acts good. She's just not good at being Livia. And I think people are sort of overrating the closeness to it. Just because she's slightly narcissistic and everyone's like, oh, you got it correct. No, that's not the case. But also, again, the scenes aren't written the same way, and like the characterization like comes from the writing too, not just the character and their performances. Johnny is way, way too masculine, and it might be my least favorite, even though that's the actor guy everybody likes, and his actions need to be more pathetic. He's just like cool and gets no repercussions and never has like a pathetic moment. And I thought of a justification for this where I was like, the whole movie is just how Tony remembers it. It's not how it actually happened. But Tony doesn't know half of the stuff that happens in the movie, so that doesn't. So it can't be just like this masculine projection of his father. I did like that Tony no-sold him entirely. This was a good part where Tony is never like intimidated by him at all. It never really comes into conflict with him. Like even when he throws the speakers out of the window, like his father is like, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" But he's like, "Those were a gift" or something. But he's not like screaming at him and saying, "You're grounded, little boy, and I'm gonna beat the fuck out of you" or something. So I liked that aspect. But everything else is just like, so he just gets to be cool. Like this is dumb as fuck. Junior was way too calm and smart, only to be the more vengeful come the end twist. I don't think like the end twist. I don't like, but was trying to be Sopranos. Junior is like seems way too smart. Like he's talking really calmly and stuff. This is not like Junior at all. Did they forget that and think just because he had glasses he was like a smart guy? Like Junior is just like the rest of them, and he's kind of like not as cool as Johnny. Which is definitely, like, they clearly, like... And I think a lot of Junior fans are mad at the movie for them, like, massacring his character and making him, like, a fuck-up the whole time. And not cool. Which were all aspects of the original show, but they were all subtextual. Rather than Livia just saying, "Dicky's way better at talking to Tony than you, Junior. You're not gonna raise my son, and you're not cool. Like, and your girlfriend's probably fucking a bunch of other guys," Paulie says to Junior, and Junior doesn't get mad at all. And part of you is like, oh, it shows that Junior is a smart guy and he doesn't feel the need to portray his masculinity by beating people up. But Junior was like a strong guy. Like Tony even says, like, strong as a bull or whatever. It just feels wrong. It's like you wanted him to kind of be a little pathetic. Not in the sense that he was in the original show or like the characters were or the way I've been using that word throughout the thing. But for him to like be like a loser. And always, like, second best. Which is kind of what his character is. But you never say that out loud in the show. And if you were to say that to Junior, he would, like, beat you up. And Junior's not incompetent. And, like, it's more nuanced than that in the original show in a million different ways. And it just wasn't in the movie. And they had him be the one that kills Dicky or orders the hit on him in the end because Dicky laughed at him when he slipped over in the rain. Which is obviously like a stupid scenario, but that's a very Sopranos scenario of like Tony killing Ralphie because the horse. That was fine. The execution of it was terrible. Like there's a very similar scene where like Richie is laughing as he helps Junior get his hand out of the sink, and like after he slipped in the shower and stuff like that. And like Junior doesn't act like that at all. It's like completely off with the Junior characterization. And this is like even worse with these two actors and how I really, really don't like either of them. Because in the original show in season 1, and I think the Johnny actor is even in like season 4 or 5 or something when Tony meets his old girlfriend when she's old. They are absolutely 1,000,000,000%, 1,000,000%, trillion% perfect in the original show. And these two are just completely different. Like, Johnny in the original show, when in the flashbacks, is like so cool, but in like a lame sense. Like he's like the perfect like street guy who's like funny and everybody thinks is funny and everybody kind of likes, even though, but he would like get mad or something and he would lose his temper, but he wasn't like masculine. Like this guy in that plays Johnny in this movie is like a movie masculine, where he like comes in and he puts his foot on the table and he says, "Fuck you, bitch, cook my dinner and get the fuck out of here, and I just want to go fuck my Gumar, brother." Literally, as he's talking to his brother. Whereas the old one is like a slick talking guy. He's like so cool in that sense, and it feels like a more realistic version of what people think a masculine guy is. Whereas it's very clear that if you pushed his buttons or something, he would be as pathetic as everybody else, but he's like got this grandiose and he avoids it at all costs. It's like really cool. Whereas this guy is just like, oh, he's a masculine guy. How about I kill myself? What a boring prick. And even Junior from the original show in the flashbacks isn't as good as Johnny in the original show, but he's still good where he's like loud and he's masculine, but he seems more caring, and he's like when he's playing catch with Tony, but also when Tony is zoning out and he misses the ball, he's like, what the fuck, or whatever, and he gets mad at him and stuff like that. I don't know, it just felt perfect. Like those, obviously they're way too old to play the junior ones now. Both those actors might be fucking dead for all I know. But it's like, you should have tried to get people more like that rather than who we got, which seemed like, especially the Johnny guy, just seems like it's because it's that actor guy that we all like. I don't know. Though they're not the worst, Silvio and Paulie were absolutely worse. The absolute worst, rather, and felt like bad parodies of their characters. Silvio started actually being Silvio at the end, and it was weird. I will probably talk about this later, but them fucking up Silvio's age is, like, irredeemably terrible to me. Like, so much of Silvio's characterization in the original show is that him and Tony are like, have been together since they were kids and stuff like that. And Artie's sort of part of their group, and Ralphie wasn't, but he was kind of knew them, and Jackie was part of their group, and Silvio sort of being the wiser, doesn't stick his head out as much guy. That's, like, all good, but Silvio just being, like, him balding or whatever when he's supposed to be, like, 20 is, like, okay, that's kind of funny, and he has a hairpiece, that's kind of funny, I guess, to point that out, though you already did that gag with Ralphie. But yeah, they fuck up a bunch of the cool backstory stuff to The Sopranos, where it's like, oh, these guys used to hang out, and they've been friends since they were kids, and like back in the olden days, we mentioned these characters, which Dicky Moltisanti is one of those characters, which is fleshed out here. But like, it makes no sense for Silvio and Paulie. Well, I guess Paulie kind of, but it makes no sense for Silvio and Pussy to be like in with the older group here, especially when they're like nobodies come season 1 of The Sopranos 40 years later. They're just like Tony's guys. It's like, where is Jimmy? Where is like Carlo? Where is all the other captains? Where's I'm forgetting their names. But the one guy that's weddings in season 1. Like, where are all these guys? Like, they should be the ones in these positions, but it's clearly like Silvio and Pussy are here because they're the characters everybody recognizes. This is actually a point I have here. Where's Mikey? Mikey, Mickey, that's funny. Like, he should definitely be around and be around Junior already. It's a bit of season 1 syndrome. This is a thing that Preston Jacobs talks about in Game of Thrones a lot, where it's like weird to think that like Tyrion and Lysa and Stannis all lived together for like 15 years in the Red Keep, and it's like they did, but they obviously didn't. And it's like weird when Tyrion shows up and it's like he's meeting Varys for the first time in like season 2. Or book 2. And like, you idiots should have already been friends. What the fuck is going on here? And it's like, well, the show started then, we hadn't conceptualized these characters and their relationships and that they would be fleshed out later. So it's like in season 1, like Jimmy and Carlos, it's not Carlo. Carlo's like the older dude from the later seasons, but the other guy that ends up being a rat too. And Mikey and all these guys are all very relevant in season 1, but a lot of them die in season 1, so they're not like characters that we got attached to over time. So it doesn't make sense to have them like be in the movie because the audience isn't going to recognize them. But it also breaks the continuity in a series that probably should care. And it was always cool to hear about, and because it made sense in the original show, and it was like, oh yes, they would have all been friends, and Ralphie was never as high up in the mob with them because he decided he didn't want to go to the one thing where they did the table thing, and Feech Lamana, and where's Feech in this fucking movie, etc., etc. Where is Jackie and Richie? I think Jackie was in it for a bit as one of Tony's friends as they're running around, but like Richie is older than them and could have been around. You could have had a scene with him and Janice or something. It's easy. But yeah, like Silvio is terrible. Like, he's like doing the parody face, and it's like, this is just like a YouTuber parody of this character, but we're supposed to be throwing it straight. Oh, Silvio actually being Silvio at the end is like, he's figuring out everybody's problems, what Silvio kind of did. He was like clearly like the smartest one. But it was still like this parody guy doing it, and it was like, oh, it was weird. I guess it was an okay scene, but still, it was like, ugh. And Paulie is like way too mean and not funny at all in the Paulie sense, where Paulie is very much like the older Johnny in the flashbacks, where it's like, this is like a masculine guy who's like funny, and he like survives because he's witty, and you can like not take him too seriously, even if he clearly takes himself too seriously, but it's not to a comedic movie degree. This Paulie is like a fucking like a loser, like a masculine guy. It's like, kill yourself. So yeah, they were obviously terrible. Though I've seen some people say that it was those two were all right, but I've also seen people say that Silvio was like obviously terrible, which is interesting. But yeah, I didn't like all this stuff. They were all slightly off. And a lot of them were a lot off, like Junior, Johnny, Paulie, Silvio. Pussy was okay, but he wasn't around enough, really. The references and callbacks were terrible. I hated basically every single one of them. I think, the David Chase one was alright, where David Chase gets to be Old Man DeMio in, like, the one thing, which I think we all thought Ray Liotta was in, the trailers, but that's funny. The callbacks are constant and made my eyes roll every time. I feel like I watched a video where they said the callbacks weren't that bad, and it feels like, I think it was the Jeremy Johns review, and it's like, but he had said he had only seen season 1, so I was like, you just don't get it, but like, these were terrible. Junior says your sister's cunt twice, and it was terrible the first time, and then it's in a serious situation the second time. Your sister's cunt is a famous line he says when he slips over in the shower. It's very funny in the original show. It seems like something he just came out of nowhere because he fell over and didn't actually say a proper insult. But then it's like something he says all the time, and it's like, oh my god. And it's said like twice when he's like falling or something. It's like, Jesus. Does everything... It is like... I was almost at George Lucas levels of bad, but he like didn't do those callbacks too much. He like did the rhyming thing. But who's terrible with like the callbacks? It's somebody. Is it Marvel or something? It's just like, ugh. Livia literally says "poor you" a bunch, which is a famous line she says in the original show. They say the fucking varsity athlete thing, which is fucking annoying. It was like a love letter to the Reddit. This is true. Every line they said from the original show was fucking terrible. I hated it. It seemed like, oh, we're doing the fucking thing from the original show. Don't you love it, guys? I already talked about the Carmella cameo being terrible. Tony wouldn't fight like that in front of Carmella and end up with her, which is like, Carmella's like, she's not smart, but she's like, I feel like she would be turned off if Tony did that in front of her. Now she might be turned on if he had beaten the shit out of the guy and like killed him or something, because that's like a thing Sopranos women characters do all the time. But not have like a pathetic squabble and be trying to get like, I don't know, it felt very un-Carmella, and it was just like, Tony's with Carmella, can you believe it? Yeah, I don't know. There was something else to that, but I can't remember it right now. The Christopher framing device was silly too. He did have the only real Sopranos delivery. I already talked about that. Also, it's like him in the afterlife talking about being in hell and stuff, and it's like, I don't need any Christopher dies very abruptly. He dies very like viscerally and almost ethereally, and like having him say something in the afterlife like that is, especially with the ambiguity with the cat stuff later on. Like, no, it like ruins everything about Christopher's death scene and why it's like good to have him like be talking after the fact just to frame his dumb dad's story, which was like not necessary at all. Christopher always crying around Tony and defining Tony through his killing of Christopher was stupid too. Christopher cries because as a baby he knows Tony's gonna kill him, and this old woman's gonna say that. It's like, kill yourself. Christopher should be like loving Tony. Also, the movie does seem to have like Tony killing Christopher is not like a big piece of Tony characterization to me, but the movie is framing it as like the defining piece of Tony characterization, and I didn't like that at all. The fair scene is particularly bad because it calls attention to the lack of continuity with the show. They redo a scene from the show where it's not the actors anymore, and it's like, why would you directly do this again? But also, it seems like it's another instance of that because the outcome is different unless they were just retconning the show super sloppily. But also, it seemed like it was like the third time they'd been caught there, so it's possible it's just like the same scene again, which is funny. Oh, and they're all at Satrielli's The Pork Store, which is really annoying. Like, they've all been going there for 70 years or something. Kill yourself. That was so dumb. I'm surprised Silvio didn't buy a club and say, bada bing, here we are. All lame. Oh my god, that was the last bit of it. So yeah, the many saints of Newark. I forgot to go on the Discord call and have my little icon in the corner. Overall, it was a good time. I was wondering why I haven't got a battery one yet, but it literally isn't going flat yet. There were things to like. I guess it was a pleasant viewing experience. All the acting in it of itself was pretty fine most of the time. Yeah. I feel like there's like an overall thing I should say more in praise. The girls' boobs were really great in that one scene. They were small, but I liked the way they hung. And also, I was surprised we were seeing her naked, even though we had sex scenes later. I don't know, that sex scene with Harold was really cool. I don't know, I liked everything about it. And she was really, really pretty. Also, it was like the Mad Men thing of the girl with the imperfection, like the very visible imperfection because she has a mole on her chin, actually being the hottest one, which is like, there's like a whole, that's like a big part of Don Draper's like backstory. So that was another Madmanism. Anyway, I feel like I'm forgetting to say something, and I'm trepidatious about ending the review, but I feel like it's time to end the review. Old David Chase, he tried. It was co-written. We can all blame it on the co-writer. But also, everything about The Sopranos is like sat with him for like 20 years, and it's pretty obvious that like if you redid something 20 years later, it would be very different and wouldn't fit, even if everybody else thought it was like the greatest thing of all time. You probably wouldn't, and etc. etc. I'm not going to judge the great man and his changing ideals because it doesn't fit the vibe of a show. I guess we'll wrap it up there. 3.5 stars. I'm trying to justify why the score is so high. I guess I gave the Star Wars prequels a 3.5. And this is probably better than those. But it's not a 4, definitely not. And I gave Uncharted the same score, which I watched recently, that I'm not doing a PowerPoint on because I don't have much to say. Uncharted had much better references. That one Nolan North scene on the beach was like terrific. That was like my favorite part of the whole movie. Whereas this one was terrible. Anyway, that was The Many Saints of Newark. Maybe more Sopranos content coming soon. Who knows? Will I finally get Elite RE, Jarky Bacon, and Mia to watch it? We'll have to stick around to find out. Support links in the description below. Thanks.